Jeanne Moreau was a French actress who rose to prominence under the auspices of the Comédie Française, one of France's most respected theatrical institutions. She once confessed that at the beginning of her career, she kept her ambitions hidden from her father, knowing full well he was vehemently opposed to her choice. In her early teenage years, she initially dreamed of becoming a dancer, partially inspired by her mother, Catherine, who had performed at a Parisian cabaret music hall. For a time, Jeanne Moreau embraced the notion of following in her mother's footsteps. Yet when she visited the Comédie Française to see the celebrated French actress Marie Belle, she experienced what could only be described as an epiphany. She felt that her rightful place was no longer in the dark among the audience, but rather in the spotlight on the stage. From that day forward, dance no longer held the same allure it once did. She explained later that her newfound love of acting wasn't about fame or fortune. It provided a precious escape from real-life hardships. Acting was like stepping into another world, a place where she could forget her own burdens and assume someone else's experiences, even if only for a few hours. While her mother supported her budding theatrical aspirations, Jeanne Moreau's father was enraged when he eventually discovered that his daughter was secretly performing in small plays in the local theater scene. In fact, she had tried to live two parallel lives for quite some time, attending rehearsals in secrecy and carefully disguising the fact that she was pursuing her passion. She would slip away on weekend afternoons, telling her father she was visiting a friend or studying at the library. But in reality, she was delving into the world of dramatic arts, practicing scenes with a local troupe, and gradually making a name for herself among the small but devoted theatergoers in her town. The dual life ended abruptly when, following a successful local production, she appeared on the front page of a regional newspaper. That public recognition infuriated her father. In a moment of intense anger, he expelled her from the family home, unwilling to tolerate her defiance. Devastating though it was, Jeanne Moreau left, determined to follow her artistic instincts. They remained estranged for 4 years, reconciling only when her father fell ill and needed her assistance. Even then, the question of whether he approved of her acting was never truly settled. Over time, however, life's tragedies and her father's declining health overshadowed old arguments, and they managed to find a fragile peace. Jeanne Moreau eventually achieved international recognition following the release of a controversial film called The Lovers in 1959. Directed by Louis Malle, the film tells the story of a provincial wife who meets a man by chance and, in a haze of passion and spontaneity, leaves her spouse and child behind. The material was considered scandalous in many parts of the world. Censors in multiple countries either cut entire scenes or banned the film outright for its explicit elements and bold portrayal of marital infidelity. Nonetheless, it gained critical acclaim, winning the special jury prize at the 1958 Venice Film Festival. It was also nominated for the Golden Lion, the festival's highest honor. The uproar in some countries seemed only to bolster international curiosity, and suddenly, Jeanne Moreau found her face splashed across movie posters far beyond France. Her poised, captivating performances began drawing comparisons to other European actresses, such as Ingrid Bergman and Audrey Hepburn, yet she steadfastly avoided signing the long-term Hollywood contracts that were customary at the time, likening them to prison terms. She preferred her independence. She wanted the freedom to pick projects that interested her, either because they spoke to her personally or provided her a quick financial boost when taxes or other urgent bills came due. For instance, she once accepted a role in 5 Branded Women, 1960, primarily to pay off her tax debts. This individualistic streak manifested beyond her choice of roles. Politically, Jeanne Moreau was never one to shy away from activism. She supported the socialist politician Lionel Jospin in the 2002 French presidential elections, viewing him as a champion of cultural programs and social welfare. Decades earlier, in 1971, she had attached her name to a manifesto penned by philosopher and writer Simone de Beauvoir, calling for the legalization of abortion in France. This bold and controversial statement, often referred to as the Manifesto of the 343, was signed by 343 women who claimed to have undergone illegal abortions. Publication of this document caused a national uproar and contributed significantly to the eventual reform of abortion laws in the country. Jeanne Moreau's signature on the manifesto represented an act of solidarity with women who felt that laws banning or restricting access to safe abortions were oppressive and archaic. Over time, she attached her name to other causes as well, including a 1997 petition calling for protests against restrictive immigration laws. She saw these issues as fundamental to human rights and free artistic expression, insisting that art and culture thrive only in societies that protect personal liberties. Despite her vocal support for various social causes, she resisted being labeled a feminist, or at least disliked when others insisted she was not one. She said that her love for men and her interest in preserving her femininity were not incompatible with caring about women's rights. In her view, defending women's legal and social equality did not mean repudiating love, desire, and romantic relationships with men. In interviews, she often spoke about the necessity of understanding how fragile freedom can be. She believed that a single thought, if twisted or manipulated, could lead to war or catastrophe. Artists, in her opinion, had a special responsibility to guard democratic values, because creativity, beauty, and free expression could not flourish in a repressive environment. She summed it up succinctly: art is freedom. Jeanne Moreau's romantic life was undeniably colorful. When she first joined the Comédie Française, she fell in love with another actor in the troupe. Their passionate affair led to a pregnancy. The two married under a sense of obligation rather than genuine readiness for matrimony. Within a couple of years, she divorced him, feeling that the relationship had run its course and that she had been far too young to know what she really wanted. She later entrusted the care of their child, her only son, to her former mother-in-law. Despite the upheaval, Jeanne Moreau remained on cordial terms with her ex-husband, who occasionally directed her in films during the 1960s. The knowledge that they could collaborate professionally, even after a personal breakup, was a testament to how deeply both of them believed in theater and the creative process as a unifying force. In her eyes, it was possible to separate personal entanglements from the artistic synergy needed on set. During the late 1950s, Jeanne Moreau met director Louis Malle, and the two quickly became involved. By that time, Malle was emerging as one of the bright young luminaries of French cinema, known for his willingness to tackle subject matter considered provocative, even taboo. Their collaboration on The Lovers was a turning point in both their personal and professional lives. Jeanne Moreau once gave a revealing interview in which she explained that she had been torn while filming the love scenes for Malle. She felt certain that performing them exactly as he envisioned would make him love her as an actress, but potentially alienate him as a romantic partner. Still, she embraced the emotional complexity, concluding that the film demanded a certain level of raw authenticity. The relationship with Malle, for all its creative fecundity, did not last forever. Nevertheless, the break did not sever their intellectual or artistic respect for each other. Another high-profile affair linked her with the legendary Orson Welles, who is reported to have declared her the best actress in the world. While their relationship was not long-lasting, they remained affectionate toward each other afterward. In an interview much later in her life, Jeanne Moreau was asked how she managed to stay friends with so many of her ex-lovers. She theorized that this was possible because both she and the men in her life were aware that everything in life, particularly passion, could be fleeting. They allowed themselves to savor the joy of being together without letting bitterness or resentment creep in when circumstances shifted. For her, the knowledge that nothing endures forever was liberating rather than depressing. It allowed her to cherish the moments she shared with her partners without clinging to illusions of permanence. Shortly after her relationship with Louis Malle ended, Jeanne Moreau developed a close correspondence with Swedish director Ingmar Bergman. She had seen one of his films at a time when she felt lost in the aftermath of her breakup, and something about his cinematic worldview resonated deeply with her. She wrote him a series of letters, 3 by her count, before he finally replied. They agreed to meet in Berlin. Though they never became lovers, they forged a close friendship that endured for decades. They even conceptualized a joint film project, tentatively titled Lemur. Bergman believed that Jeanne Moreau perfectly fit the character he had in mind. However, language barriers, the fact that neither of them had enough command of the other's native tongue, despite the disappointment, they continued exchanging letters and discussing film ideas, united by their mutual fascination with portraying human emotions in unflinchingly honest ways. Jeanne Moreau also harbored singing talent, releasing several studio recordings that showcased her delicate yet expressive vocals. She was known to have performed the theme song for one of her own films, and even joined Frank Sinatra on stage at Carnegie Hall in 1984 for a special collaboration, an evening that was particularly memorable for fans who had never expected these two distinctive voices to share a moment. Surprisingly, she almost never performed live, often declining invitations for concerts or musical tours. Her reluctance to sing publicly became a point of speculation among journalists, but she never gave a definitive explanation for why she avoided performing her songs on stage. Some believed she was simply more comfortable inhabiting fictional characters than revealing herself as a solo musical performer. Others thought she might have had stage fright specific to singing, which was quite different from acting in her estimation. Whatever the real reason, her limited ventures into public singing only amplified the mystique. During the filming of 7 Days, 7 Nights, the project that earned her a Cannes Film Festival Award for Best Actress, she endured a frightening family crisis. Her son, who was about 10 years old at the time, had come to the set accompanied by one of Jeanne Moreau's co-stars, Jerome. While out driving, the car was involved in a serious accident. Her son slipped into a coma, which left everyone involved terrified for his life. Jeanne Moreau had to carry on filming while coping with this emotional maelstrom, simultaneously visiting the hospital and rushing back to perform her scenes. By some miracle, her son recovered shortly after the production ended. Over time, he found his own form of self-expression through painting, eventually becoming a respected artist. Yet mother and son had a complicated relationship. Jeanne Moreau, only 21 when she gave birth, had not truly wanted to be a mother. She once acknowledged that many women would be horrified by her admission, but she needed to speak her truth. She didn't feel maternal. On top of that, just 2 hours after giving birth, she had phoned a director to declare that she was ready to return to work. From all accounts, acting was the true passion that fueled her, more than any conventional notion of family life. Her willingness to speak candidly about her ambivalence toward motherhood put her at odds with conservative factions of society, particularly in mid-20th century France, when women were still widely expected to cherish domestic roles. At the same time, it made her a beacon for those who felt that women ought to be free to shape their lives as they chose, without the weight of social convention dictating how they should or should not feel about parenting. Although Jeanne Moreau might never have identified primarily as a feminist, in many respects she embodied some of the era's most forward-thinking attitudes. She remained active in film for decades, sometimes lending her presence to big-budget international productions, and at other times preferring to work in modest French or European art house films. While her name may not have reached the same global commercial popularity as a Hollywood star like Marilyn Monroe or Audrey Hepburn, among cinephiles she was revered for the depth she brought to each role, regardless of a project's size or scope. Indeed, she turned down some highly lucrative contracts in the American studio system because she didn't want to be limited to a set number of pictures under the same banner. She always wanted the creative liberty to jump from a moody Italian drama to a buoyant French comedy or to a small, gritty film in need of her particular brand of intensity. Reflecting on the trajectory of her career reveals much about the era in which she lived. She came of age at a moment when France was recovering from the trauma of World War II. The country was grappling with issues of modernization, shifting gender roles, and evolving social structures, especially after the upheavals of May 1968, when students and workers took to the streets demanding an end to authoritarian mindsets in education and governance. Some might argue that Jeanne Moreau's personal life, replete with passionate affairs, divorces, and existential quests, was emblematic of the broader cultural shift toward questioning traditional norms. Many young women saw in her a fearless spirit, someone who broke away from parental confines, from rigid definitions of wife and mother, and from the constraints of stifling studio contracts. She repeatedly charted her own course, both in her professional sphere and in her personal decisions. Still, that freedom came at a price. The father-daughter rift was only one manifestation of how her independence clashed with familial expectations. Later on, as her son grew, there were inevitable tensions. He had been raised in large part by others, while Jeanne Moreau was acting abroad or consumed by the demands of her career. Some close friends claimed that although mother and child eventually grew closer, their relationship was more akin to that of two distant relatives learning to appreciate each other's company rather than the traditionally close-knit bond society expected. For Jeanne Moreau, it was essential to be honest about these matters and not mask her true feelings. She considered it a form of respect, both to herself and to the people around her, to acknowledge how complicated the parental role can be. As the decades progressed, Jeanne Moreau continued to select roles guided by an inner compass, often focusing on characters who were experiencing moments of profound personal crisis or transformation. She found such parts in various international co-productions. In interviews, she mentioned that crossing linguistic and cultural barriers as an actress appealed to her because it echoed her own sense of existing on the periphery of societal expectations. Directors like Michelangelo Antonioni sought her out for roles that demanded introspection, while others recognized that the combination of her own life experiences and her refined stage training allowed her to deliver multi-layered performances. Indeed, she occasionally revisited the theater stage for select productions, often to rave reviews. The story of how she avoided signing long contracts can be further understood by looking at the film industry's climate in the 1950s and 1960s. Back then, the studio system still had a powerful grip on actors, particularly in Hollywood, where performers were frequently tied to multi-year deals that stipulated strict conditions on the types of roles they could play, even controlling their off-screen images. Contract players were sometimes forced to accept scripts they detested and even adopt a fabricated public persona. Publicity departments concocted everything from celebrity romances to personal tragedies, all to bolster box office appeal. Having grown up in France, where there was more emphasis on auteur-driven cinema, Jeanne Moreau found the notion of being creatively stifled or manipulated entirely unacceptable. She believed an actress should have the right to choose her roles, adapt her craft, and grow artistically. Her refusal to play by Hollywood's rules may have limited her mainstream recognition in the United States, but it also cemented her identity as a serious actress who prioritized meaningful work over global stardom. Her support for Lionel Jospin in the 2002 elections was hardly her first foray into politics. She had been shaped in part by the intellectual fervor that spread through Paris in the post-war years. Writers such as Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Simone de Beauvoir influenced not just political thought but also cultural life, advocating existential philosophies that championed free will and social responsibility. Jeanne Moreau's involvement in the 1971 Manifesto for Abortion Rights was a natural fit within this milieu. Abortion was still criminalized or heavily restricted in many countries, and the boldness of French women openly declaring they had abortions, and thus, under the law, implicating themselves, was a radical gesture. These were the same decades that saw major social transformations, including changing attitudes toward relationships, marriage, and the autonomy of women over their own bodies. That Jeanne Moreau lent her signature was consistent with the rebellious, boundary-pushing spirit she displayed in her work and personal life. That rebellious streak also manifested in her romantic entanglements with directors and co-stars. On set, creative collaboration often blended seamlessly with passionate liaisons. The intensity demanded by certain scenes could spill into real-life feelings. Yet she remained philosophical about these affairs, describing them as transitory journeys that both parties could cherish. She once commented that it was marvelous to travel with someone as long as nothing ugly interfered. That same mentality helped her maintain friendships even with those who had once been intimate partners. She tended not to dwell on jealousy or bitterness, refusing to see ex-lovers as enemies or failures. Orson Welles' appraisal of her as the best actress in the world was no idle compliment. Welles was known for his candor, capable of withering assessments of those he didn't admire. For him to lavish such praise indicated that he saw in Jeanne Moreau a rare quality, the ability to radiate genuine feeling with minimal theatricality, a skill that set extraordinary actresses apart from merely good ones. Some historians speculate that Welles considered casting her in more of his projects, but either scheduling conflicts or changes in production finance prevented more extensive collaborations. Nevertheless, she did manage a brief affair with him, captured forever in anecdotes from Welles's associates who recalled seeing the two in animated discussions over wine deep into the night, passionately debating film techniques, politics, and the complexities of the human soul. Her near collaboration with Ingmar Bergman remains a tantalizing, might have been in European cinema. Bergman, known for exploring existential anguish, psychological nuance, and moral confrontation, felt that Jeanne Moreau might be an ideal screen partner for the kind of film he envisioned. In the end, language barriers and scheduling conflicts interfered. When she later referred to the project as Lemur, she smiled wistfully, indicating that the name itself had some secret significance to Bergman that they never fully disclosed publicly. Despite never co-creating a film, they stayed close until the end of their lives, exchanging musings on art, mortality, and the ephemeral nature of human bonds. Jeanne Marie's confrontation with censorship in The Lovers is just one instance that demonstrates how she often wound up at the center of cultural controversies. The film was subjected to substantial editing in many countries. Debates raged about moral standards in cinema, pitting progressive viewers who applauded the film's honesty against conservative elements that believed it undermined social norms and threatened the sanctity of marriage. Critics in France lauded her performance, praising the subtlety with which she conveyed the protagonist's emotional turmoil. Outside France, however, government boards demanded cuts, and religious institutions spoke out against it. The scandal propelled Jeanne Marie to a higher level of international fame, simultaneously earning her the label of a provocateur. She herself pointed out that the so-called inappropriate content was simply a portrayal of real human intimacy, something she felt audiences ought to see depicted truthfully. For her, the controversy was a sign that film had the power to disrupt complacency and force viewers to confront their own biases. In subsequent years, she continued to harness that disruptive capacity of cinema. Her roles spanned a wide range. She might play a woman yearning for spiritual meaning in one project, and in the next, portray someone whose flamboyant sensuality redefined notions of female desire. That versatility helped her remain a sought-after performer through changing film trends. Even if she sometimes appeared only in smaller art house productions, serious directors knew she could bring an undeniable gravitas to the screen. She was occasionally approached by foreign directors eager to cast her in roles that demanded an actress of her depth, even if she didn't speak the language fluently. She once recounted a humorous story of traveling to Italy for a film project and learning her lines phonetically, all while trusting that her body language and the director's guidance would fill in any gaps left by her limited Italian vocabulary. Her cameo with Frank Sinatra at Carnegie Hall remains one of those dazzling anecdotes frequently mentioned in retrospectives about her life. The story goes that Sinatra, having admired her charm and sophistication, asked whether she would honor him with a short appearance. She agreed, albeit reluctantly, and rehearsed only a handful of times. On the night of the performance, the audience witnessed a rare synergy between the iconic American crooner and the compelling French actress, who in her own reserved way could captivate crowds through a simple flicker of expression. The event became legendary among fans of both Sinatra and French cinema, but Jeanne Marie never repeated the experiment. She went back to her film sets, returning to the form of expression she adored most, acting. Another intriguing aspect of her life was her stance on immigration laws in France, made evident by her signing of a 1997 petition protesting newly tightened regulations. She believed that restrictive policies often harmed vulnerable individuals seeking safety or better opportunities. For Jeanne Marie, who had built her career across geographic and linguistic borders, the notion of shutting doors on people was antithetical to the spirit of cultural exchange she cherished. She claimed that just as she needed an open mind to portray different characters, societies needed openness to learn from those who came from different walks of life. Her father's eventual admission to needing her care signified a bittersweet chapter toward the end of his life. All those years of rejecting her chosen path by expelling her from home were replaced by a kind of quiet acceptance as he relied on her during his illness. She tended to him, setting aside any lingering resentment. In interviews, she seldom discussed this reconciliation in depth, but those close to her observed that it brought a measure of solace. Perhaps the father finally saw that his daughter, far from disgracing the family, had become a revered artist, emblematic of certain French cultural values like independence, artistic daring, and global influence. The paternal conflict also shed light on the generational divide that existed in post-war France. Many fathers who had lived through difficult economic times or the war years could not comprehend why their children would pursue impractical careers like acting or dancing, especially if those ambitions entailed an unconventional lifestyle that didn't guarantee financial stability. For a man of his generation, discipline and tradition might have seemed paramount. However, for Jeanne Moreau, the post-war era was about rebirth and forging new identities that weren't dictated by old norms. The father-daughter story became emblematic of a broader national narrative, in which a new generation broke from the confines of what had once been considered proper or respectable. Even after decades in the limelight, Jeanne Moreau maintained an understated aura off-camera. Journalists noted that she had no particular fondness for giving interviews, but agreed to them as part of her professional obligations. She preferred small dinner gatherings with close friends to large-scale industry events. Though she recognized the significance of awards and accolades, she was never seen aggressively campaigning for them. That said, she did earn multiple honors, including recognition at various festivals. Many speculated that if she had cultivated a more public persona, attending star-studded parties, courting Hollywood producers, she might have soared to even greater mainstream fame. Yet she seemed at peace with her choices. Her involvement with the Comédie Française remained a point of pride throughout her life. She often reminisced about her earliest days there, learning from veteran actors who introduced her to classical French drama, especially the works of Molière, Racine, and Corneille. The rigorous discipline of that environment proved invaluable when she stepped into film roles requiring meticulous preparation and emotional subtlety. It also shaped her approach to line delivery. She had learned that precise diction could be a powerful tool capable of lending gravity to the simplest phrases. The hallmark of Jeanne Moreau's career was her willingness to tackle characters grappling with moral ambiguity. In an industry inclined toward neat heroes and villains, she gravitated to scripts portraying life's complexities. Whether playing a woman entangled in extramarital love, a dreamer searching for artistic fulfillment, or a disillusioned mother, she preferred roles that avoided simplistic resolutions. Directors often praised her for her emotional honesty. If the script required a moment of heartbreak, she would draw from her own well of experiences, being thrown out by her father, giving up her son, or coping with failed love affairs, to convey genuine anguish without tipping into melodrama. Although she was best known for her contributions to French and European cinema, a handful of American productions did manage to feature her. Whenever she did appear in Hollywood-based movies, critics described her as a breath of fresh air, introducing an old-world sophistication or an intriguing, emotional charge. Yet she resisted attempts by any single market to brand her. She believed that an actress should belong first and foremost to the art of storytelling, not to a studio, not to a national identity, but to the narrative itself. It was a testament to how seriously she took her craft that she never became just another face in a formulaic movie. Each role was chosen with care, ensuring she could bring something uniquely hers to the screen. One lesser-known anecdote about her early career revolves around the clandestine nature of her auditions. Because her father was so strongly opposed to her path, she occasionally enlisted friends to forge permission slips or to provide alibis. giving the impression that she was staying late for extracurricular school activities. In truth, she was hurriedly memorizing lines from classic French plays, rummaging through secondhand costumes, and rehearsing her blocking. This sense of urgency added to the electric thrill she felt. It wasn't merely the excitement of stepping into a character. It was the knowledge that she was flouting her father's wishes for the sake of something she believed in wholeheartedly. Her mother's reaction to all this was the polar opposite of her father's. Having been a dancer in Paris, Catherine understood the magnetic pull of the stage. Some evenings, the mother would discreetly help Jeanne-Marie remove stage makeup, carefully applying cleansers so that she could return home without raising her father's suspicions. The mother, however, did not want to provoke a direct confrontation, fearing the father would impose even stricter rules or forcibly remove Jeanne-Marie from the theatrical milieu altogether. This delicate balance, secret support from her mother and open opposition from her father, was the backdrop of Jeanne-Marie's adolescence. She eventually found her place in the world of film, but not without enduring the scrutiny of critics, censors, and the public. Her name was frequently associated with controversy because she embraced scripts that examined taboo subjects such as adultery, abortion, female sexuality, and political dissent. Far from being a liability, these controversies often elevated her status as an actress of courage, a woman unafraid to hold up a mirror to society's collective unease. Her films became rallying points for discussions around censorship and social freedoms. While some might have hoped she would adopt a safer, less provocative career path, Jeanne-Marie believed it was precisely the artist's job to provoke, question, and reflect reality, no matter how uncomfortable that reality might be. By the time she was receiving major accolades from festivals like Cannes and Venice, she was simultaneously dealing with personal turmoil, her father's health decline, the complexities of motherhood, and the termination of significant romantic relationships. That she managed to deliver career-best performances amidst such private upheaval speaks to her resilience. Directors commented that her personal experiences seemed to sharpen her ability to inhabit roles that required traversing emotional extremes. She never simply went through the motions. Each performance felt as though she were channeling her own life's passions, regrets, and epiphanies. Her friendships with luminaries like Ingmar Bergman and Orson Welles were grounded in mutual respect. Welles, who had famously warred with Hollywood studios, recognized a kindred spirit in Jeanne-Marie, someone who never let commercial considerations override artistic integrity. Bergman, whose intensity had alienated some collaborators, found in her an empathetic soul, someone prepared to face the darkest corners of the human condition. Even though their prospective film project never materialized, the letters they exchanged stand as testament to their intellectual camaraderie. Jeanne-Marie once joked that if they had ever learned each other's languages fully, they might have produced a film so emotionally powerful that audiences would have fainted in their seats. As she advanced into middle age, Jeanne-Marie remained an icon of the European art scene, garnering tributes and retrospectives in film societies around the world. University programs began studying her early works as exemplars of post-war French cinema. She also became an occasional lecturer, invited to speak at film schools about her experiences with the Comédie Française, her approach to performance, and the necessity for actors to fully commit to the psychological depths of their characters. Students often reported being astonished at how humble she seemed in person, given her legend status on screen. She would openly discuss her mistakes, from missed career opportunities to personal regrets. Yet she also underlined that she wouldn't want to change anything about her journey, believing all her choices, right or wrong, had shaped her artistry. Around the same time, her adult son emerged as a gifted painter, forging a name for himself in modern art circles. While mother and son never adhered to a typical familial dynamic, they supported each other's endeavors from a respectful distance. She attended a few of his exhibitions incognito, wishing not to steal the spotlight. After he had achieved a certain measure of success, she quietly admitted a sense of relief, knowing he had found fulfillment in his own creative path. Though she never expressed regret about her lack of maternal instinct, she acknowledged that seeing him flourish brought her happiness. When she was asked in an interview about what keeps her going, she cited a ceaseless fascination with human nature. She said that no matter how many roles she tackled, there was always a new facet of human emotion or conflict to explore. This curiosity extended to her political commitments as well. She believed that an artist who stands on the sidelines refusing to engage with social issues risks becoming stagnant. Whether it was championing civil liberties, women's reproductive rights, or humane immigration policies, she felt her artistry was intertwined with a sense of moral responsibility. Although she typically refrained from large-scale public speaking, she occasionally gave impassioned statements about the fragility of democratic ideals. She would caution that the seeds of oppression often begin with a single insidious idea, be it the notion that a woman's place is solely in the home, that certain groups of people are unworthy of immigration, or that creative expression should be censored for the public's moral good. She found the latter particularly dangerous, recalling how the lovers faced censorship in multiple regions. In her view, restricting artistic content rarely prevented what censors deemed immoral. Instead, it stifled debate and drove curiosity underground. Her signing of the 1997 petition against immigration restrictions was a reminder that she believed national identity should not be used as a weapon. She reflected on how her mother's background as a dancer in a cosmopolitan city like Paris had exposed her to a wide range of nationalities, languages, and cultures. Similarly, Jean-Marie's father, though disapproving of her career, had once traveled internationally for his own work. She found it paradoxical that a society as culturally rich as France could turn inward with exclusionary policies. Ultimately, she viewed immigration as a chance for renewal, akin to a stage production that welcomes fresh talents and new storylines to invigorate its repertoire. Her experiences on film sets also gave her a deep empathy for collaboration across borders. She recalled an Italian production where the film crew included technicians from Germany, Spain, and Yugoslavia, all working seamlessly to bring a story to life. She would describe the camaraderie at shared lunch breaks, where everyone exchanged bits of their native languages. This, for her, was a microcosm of what the world could achieve if people embraced one another's differences rather than building the walls. The fact that she later endorsed political petitions on immigration, women's rights, and free expression was a natural extension of these convictions. Meanwhile, her sporadic forays into singing, especially the 1984 Carnegie Hall performance with Frank Sinatra, became a near-legendary footnote in her career. Parisians who admired her dramatic flair found it enchanting to see her step momentarily into the music world. Sinatra was, by that point, a global phenomenon, and Jean-Marie's presence alongside him lent a certain Parisian mystique to the evening. Some who attended described the performance as spellbinding. Her understated style contrasted with Sinatra's showmanship. Yet the ephemeral nature of that collaboration underscored her determination not to be pigeonholed. She didn't consider herself a singer at heart, even though she had the vocal talent. Some fans believed that if she had devoted herself to music, She might have reached stardom in that domain as well. But much like her approach to Hollywood contracts, she refused to be tethered to anything that didn't speak to her in the present moment. Her refusal to do regular concerts or tours reinforced this idea. She disliked explaining the decision, possibly because she felt she owed no one an apology for living life on her own terms. At times, she hinted that singing live felt too personal, as though she were exposing a more vulnerable side of herself than acting required. Acting, after all, allowed her to become someone else. Music might have demanded she bear her own soul directly, something she wasn't inclined to do in front of large audiences. Over the course of her lifetime, Jeanne Moreau granted a few extensive interviews to major publications, reflecting on the nature of fame and creativity. She pointed out that the adoration showered upon actors could be addictive, leading some to lose sight of their authentic selves. She had witnessed colleagues transform under the glare of publicity, becoming caricatures of the people they once were. She saw the profession as demanding a constant balancing act between public exposure and private introspection. Perhaps her own aversion to long studio contracts or frequent public engagements was, in part, a strategy to protect her inner life from being swallowed up by commerce or gossip. She always recalled her earliest days at Comédie Française with a mix of fondness and awe. The institution itself was older than the French Republic, counting among its alumni some of the most revered names in theatrical history. She often spoke of the hush that fell over the wings before a performance, actors standing there, hearts pounding, waiting for the cue to step under the lights. She believed that a sense of tradition, of continuity with centuries of French dramatic art, shaped her technique and gave her a reverence for the power of storytelling. The anecdote about her father throwing her out of the house following her newspaper cover story conveys how quickly her life changed once she was thrust into public view. One day, she was an enthusiastic but obscure stage actress, and the next day she was discovered by a local journalist who splashed her image across the front page. In that moment, the private illusion she had maintained, crafting elaborate lies to hide her theater life, came crashing down. The heartbreak was profound. She had to choose between obeying her father and nurturing her own dreams. Her choice, though painful, set her on a path that eventually brought global acclaim. Being thrown out also meant learning independence at a young age. She took on odd jobs to support herself, including a brief stint helping a seamstress who sewed costumes for the theater. That experience, she later joked, gave her an appreciation for the behind-the-scenes labor that made her stage appearances possible. She remembered watching older seamstresses, their fingers calloused from needle pricks, moving swiftly to mend a torn costume. When she gained notoriety and had her pick of elaborate designer gowns, she thought of those seamstresses, grateful for every seam they ever stitched to transform raw fabric into garments she could wear in her early performances. Her eventual reconciliation with her father, prompted by his illness, allowed her to show him a gentleness he had never shown her in her teenage years. It was she who saw to his medical needs and spent hours in a hospital corridor, waiting for test results or fighting with insurance paperwork. In that quiet time, they found a sort of truce, neither fully apologizing nor forgetting the past, but acknowledging the inevitability of life's transitions. According to those who knew them, the father never explicitly admitted he was proud of her achievements, but sometimes she would catch a glimmer of admiration in his eyes when she recounted a new role or an accolade. Her stance on the ephemeral quality of relationships, whether familial or romantic, mirrored her broader worldview. She saw life as a series of fleeting encounters, each with potential for beauty, learning, or heartbreak. Once, in an interview, she said that the saddest thing was not that people drift apart, but that they sometimes cling too tightly, causing bitterness instead of tenderness. She preferred to let go with grace, to remain on good terms if possible, and to see love affairs as chapters that enriched her life. This perspective clarified why she could befriend former partners without rancor or envy. As for the time she embarked on a project purely for the money, she was unashamed. She insisted that any honest working person sometimes took a job out of financial necessity. What mattered to her was whether, once on set, she poured her heart into the role anyway. The 1960 film Five Branded Women was a prime example. Though it may not have been the most artistically fulfilling project, it offered her a swift paycheck when she needed it. Even so, she committed to her character fully, respecting the audience's time and the collaborative nature of filmmaking. When she was asked about her mother's career as a dancer, Jeanne Moreau would smile, recalling how Catherine performed in a smoky cabaret hall, balancing finesse with showmanship. She credited her mother for teaching her that performance is about forging a direct emotional link with the audience, whether through dance steps, a song, or a monologue. She saw the entertainer's task as an act of empathy, stepping onto a stage and inviting spectators to see life through her eyes. That lesson, gleaned from watching her mother, perhaps shaped the emotional lucidity she brought to her film roles. She would recount how, as a little girl, she watched from behind the curtains as her mother danced under pink and yellow spotlights, accompanied by a small jazz band. Catherine would hold her posture regally, yet convey layers of emotion through fluid movements. Jeanne Moreau realized that the performer's job was to connect with intangible feelings, longing, sorrow, joy, anticipation, and give them shape. Later, when she turned her attention to acting, she did exactly that, but with dialogue, facial expressions, and body language meant to inhabit fictional characters. The difference between dance and acting was, in her words, the difference between the purity of movement and the complexity of speech. She found acting more liberating because it allowed for nuance in vocal inflection, lines, and interactions with fellow performers. Dance, on the other hand, was more abstract. It relied on the viewer's imagination to interpret the dancer's intention. Even though she parted ways with the dream of being a dancer, she held enormous respect for the discipline it required. Another notable dimension of her life was her approach to religion and spirituality. While she rarely spoke openly about her beliefs, close friends mentioned that she was intrigued by various philosophies: Eastern mysticism, existential Christianity, secular humanism. She saw spiritual inquiry as another route to understand the complexities of human existence, a pursuit consistent with her interest in playing layered characters on stage and screen. On occasion, she would visit monasteries in the French countryside, not so much for worship as for silent contemplation. She believed that an artist's inner life needed moments of quiet reflection to remain authentic. Her involvement in the film The Lovers, widely recognized as her breakout, corresponded with a wave of French films that signaled an openness to discussing sexuality and moral ambiguity. This wave, which preceded the French New Wave of Godard and Truffaut by just a few years, demonstrated that audiences were hungry for stories that challenged polite conventions. The fact that censorship boards in multiple countries rushed to label The Lovers obscene only heightened its allure. Meanwhile, critics at prestigious European festivals praised its boldness. It served as a stepping stone that enabled other challenging projects to find international distribution. Jeanne Moreau had unexpectedly become a focal point for debates around decency, artistry, and the function of cinema. She navigated these debates with composure, reiterating that film should mirror the truth of life, even if those truths are unpleasant or subversive. Moreover, she was sometimes described as carrying an air of elegant melancholia. This quality suited the existential narratives that were popular in certain circles of French and European cinema at the time. Directors recognized that her on-screen presence could suggest depths of sorrow or longing without the need for grand theatrical gestures. She could simply glance across a room or light a cigarette in a particular way, and audiences would sense the turmoil of the character's thoughts. Yet off-screen, she confessed that she was not perpetually moody. She could be quite playful, especially among trusted friends who had witnessed her successes and heartbreaks alike. Her one-time affair with Orson Welles, though brief, left behind anecdotes that fans of both artists still relish. They were said to have spent nights reading scripts aloud, improvising dialogues in French and English, with Welles occasionally attempting to recite lines in Jeanne Moreau's native tongue. He would sometimes become theatrical, rewriting segments on the spot. Though their romantic liaison ended, they each benefited from the synergy of exchanging ideas without fear of judgment. Looking back on her life, one sees a mosaic of bold choices, personal sacrifices, creative triumphs, and intellectual commitments. By the time she was recognized with a Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival, she had endured enough real-life drama to fill multiple autobiographies. Her father's rejection, her mother's quiet support, her child's accident, the taboo-shattering roles, and the political manifestos all contributed to a vibrant legacy that transcended mere celebrity. She was, in many respects, a prototype for the modern actress who would not be contained by tradition or genre. Even as she aged, her face etched with the lines of experience, she retained a luminous quality that shone through her later roles. Filmmakers who cast her in her 60s and 70s remarked on how her presence could anchor a scene. She possessed a regal posture, a direct gaze, and a voice that could oscillate from soothing warmth to intense reproach. Younger actors who worked with her described the invaluable education of observing her at close range, seeing how she prepared, how she adjusted to a director's notes, and how she found layers of subtext in every line. Some said she taught them the importance of living an authentic life off camera, so the well of emotion they drew from would never run dry. That ethic of authenticity was inseparable from her artistry. She urged aspiring artists to keep reading literature, exploring art galleries, and traveling when possible, so they might expand their emotional vocabulary. She acknowledged that not everyone could have a life as free of familial constraints as hers turned out to be, but she believed that even within limitations, individuals could carve out a personal space for creativity. When a young actress confided fears about parental disapproval, Jeanne Moreau would recall her own father's explosion of anger, then suggest that the real key was to cultivate enough self-belief to weather disapproval. Without that, no amount of external validation would suffice. One wonders if Jeanne Moreau ever fully healed from being disowned by her father, even though they made peace later. Interviews suggest that the scar remained, yet in some ways, that rift fueled her drive, proving herself on stage, cherishing the thrill of applause, and working relentlessly to bring difficult roles to life. As she put it in a rare moment of retrospective candor, the child in me wanted the father's blessing, but the artist in me needed none. For her, forging her own path meant accepting that some relationships might never revert to what they once were. Of course, we might also ponder the heartbreak embedded in her relationship with her son. She openly admitted that she didn't want it, referring to motherhood, and placed responsibility for him with her former mother-in-law so she could continue pursuing film roles unabated. This choice, shocking to many, demonstrated that she was willing to defy not only her father's expectations, but also society's conventional assumptions about maternal instincts. Over the years, she and her son established a cautious, respectful bond, but neither pretended that the separation had been easy. It was part of the price she paid for complete dedication to her craft. Yet she refused to label it as a mistake or regret. She maintained that everyone's life path is shaped by a series of crossroads, and no choice is devoid of complexity or consequence. In her later years, she came to be regarded as a grande dame of French cinema, a living link to an era that had revolutionized global filmmaking. She occasionally served on festival juries, evaluating new talents and offering thoughtful critiques. Younger actresses sometimes sought her counsel about negotiating contracts or handling intrusive media questions. She would advise them to keep their sense of self intact, even if that meant saying no to roles that felt wrong. People who encountered her in these final phases of her career often noted her blend of warmth and shrewd discernment. She stayed politically alert as well, keeping tabs on debates about immigration, cultural funding, and the rights of women. If a particular cause captured her attention, she would not hesitate to use her stature to rally support. Yet she remained unaligned with any single party for too long, believing that artists should remain somewhat independent, free to critique or endorse ideas based on their merits, rather than party lines. This was in keeping with her broader view that contracts, whether in art or politics, could be stifling if they demanded too much conformity. And so, in the end, Jeanne Moreau's life and career stand as a testament to the idea that personal authenticity is worth the tumult and heartbreak it can entail. She was a passionate daughter who defied her father to become an actress, a determined performer who refused to be tamed by studio contracts, and a woman of strong convictions who championed social causes without fear of public backlash. Her approach to love and family was unconventional, shaped by her unyielding devotion to her craft, yet she managed to retain amicable ties with past lovers and forge a complicated but ultimately understanding relationship with her son. She prided herself on bridging the art house world and popular cinema, never fully bowing to any system that sought to confine her. If you reflect on her journey, from the cabaret halls of Paris, where her mother once danced, to the grandeur of Cannes and Venice, where she was honored, to the tense domestic standoff with her father, and to the hush of hospital corridors, where she waited for her son to awaken from a coma, you find a tapestry woven from ambition, sacrifice, principle, and resilience. Each thread reveals her unwavering commitment to living on her own terms. For viewers who may have first encountered her in a scandal-laden film like The Lovers or a lesser-known theatrical production, she left a lasting impression through an intangible mixture of grace, gravitas, and quiet audacity. Though her father once ejected her from the family home, she eventually found a place in the hearts of millions worldwide, each drawn to some facet of her cinematic presence. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of her life is that art isn't just a refuge. It can be a vehicle for individual empowerment and cultural evolution. In her view, everyone should claim the right to self-definition, whether they are an actress on stage, a painter in a studio, or simply a person who dares to question societal rules. With all of this in mind, it's clear why, for so many film lovers, Jeanne Moreau ranks among the most fascinating figures of European cinema. She refused to let anyone else dictate her destiny, whether it was a domineering parent, a dismissive producer, or a narrow-minded censor. She embodied a certain French spirit of liberté, a refusal to be bound by tradition or fear. Through her manifold choices and experiences, she helped shape not only the cinematic landscape, but also broader cultural conversations about women's autonomy, political activism, and artistic integrity. In reflecting on her story, one might ask a question she herself often posed to audiences and interviewers. Do you see cinema as a mere diversion or as an essential mirror that reveals our deepest desires and contradictions? In her world, film was never just about entertainment. It was a platform for exploring the human condition in all its messiness. While many came to see a star, what they encountered was an actress who took her craft so seriously that she risked controversy, isolation, and personal pain to bring honest portrayals to the screen. The legacy she leaves behind challenges future generations of actors, and indeed anyone driven by passion, to honor truth above acceptance, conviction above convenience, and art above complacency. So what do you think of her remarkable saga? Did you find it surprising that an actress might abandon dancing, defy her father, sign a historic abortion manifesto, and carry on love affairs with some of the era's most influential directors, all while consistently delivering gripping performances that rattled censors and thrilled film lovers around the globe? If her journey resonates, consider taking a moment to share your thoughts on what made her so compelling. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden tales behind iconic performers, don't forget to subscribe. There are countless more stories waiting to be told, each revealing how art in its highest form can prompt us to see ourselves and the world in an entirely new light.